here for the community. So any concerns or questions or thoughts that you may have pertaining to climate change policies, whether it's concern over, say, carbon emissions or mandates, it doesn't matter. The town, if the town can answer questions about things that the town has done or positions that the town has taken, Mike will do that. If we cannot answer a question, we will write that down, and as long as it pertains to the town of Wells, we will answer that at a later point. We'll probably put out, I imagine, some sort of informational link or something online on the town's website. We ask that you address the chair if you address the select board. Again, we won't be answering questions this evening. If Mike can, we will, but the select board will not be, just because, you know, we don't know what's going to be asked for questions, so I don't think it would be a fair expectation for us to necessarily have all those answers. One thing that I'm going to ask is just, obviously this is a very politically charged conversation nationally. One thing I enjoy about this town is that we've all been able to come together and have conversations, and I just want to make sure that it does stay civil. Obviously there's a diversity in opinion on various topics, and I just ask that everybody respect that. I will be keeping order in that sense, but we are here again to hear the community input, and I think that there's a lot that can be gleaned on a personal level from listening to one another. We're going to have Mr. Hardy, who is going to act as the moderator this evening. He's going to be keeping track of time. Joe, what did we agree on? Was it 4 minutes?
Yeah, 4 or 5 minutes. It all depends on how many people have questions and comments, so it's a little hard.
So if we have time, we'll double back if somebody has, you know, if they've run short on their time. We want to make sure this is running from 6 to 8. We want to have as many people included as we possibly can. So we just ask you to be mindful of that. Again, Joe's going to be moderating. I'll be keeping order. So like I said, I don't have a big concern about that. I think everybody in the room will be respectful. So with that, we'll kick it over to Joe.
Okay. Thanks, John. And John and I and Kathy Chase and Mike had a productive meeting last week and talked about this meeting, so we're all on the same page. I will give you a little anecdote though. About 25 years ago, I stood before a group about this size. It was in the basement of the old town hall, and we were confronted with a proposal for a large LNG storage facility in Wells. Sadly, it sort of tore the town apart. It created two camps. The no's happened to prevail in the long term, but it wasn't a good experience really for the town. And I've been thinking about it, that we really don't want to repeat something like that with climate change. And as John said, there are a lot of different opinions. But we're simply going to have to respect each other and work through some of these things. And it's going to be difficult, but I think we have to commit to doing that. I've been talking about climate change and global warming for quite a few years, based on my background as a chemist, so I was pretty much in a good position to do that. One of the things that I've sort of understood is that with fossil fuels, we're all addicted in a way. We've grown up with gasoline and oil, and people refer to as an addiction, and addiction is hard to kick. We're so accustomed to it. It's done wonderful things for us in the last century. But the combustion products, fossil fuels, produce gases, and those gases accumulate in the atmosphere, and they circulate and accumulate and raise the temperature, and we are dealing now with rising atmospheric temperatures around the planet, and those temperatures and that energy that's in the atmosphere is prompting severe weather events in this country and around the world. So it's something that we have to confront. In Maine, we've been a little relieved. We've escaped some of the more dramatic events that we read about in the papers and see on the news. But even here in Maine, temperatures are up about average temperature in Maine is up about 3 degrees from a century ago. Wintertime temperatures are about 4 degrees up. Oceans, Gulf of Maine is much warmer than it used to be. Fisheries depleted. Lobsters scurrying northward as fast as they can. Insects, pests, ticks. There are issues that we have to confront. Again, they may not be front page issues here in this town, but they will be. One of the issues that certainly will confront us is an issue that made the cover of the recent Down East magazine. Sadly, this is not a feel-good story inside the Down East, inside this issue. It's basically raising alarms about the rising sea levels that all coastal communities are going to confront. And we have tough decisions to make. And the one thing, we can put off these decisions, but the longer you put them off, the more they come back to bite you. So we really do have to plan ahead. The marshes are an important ecosystem. They're very valuable, but so are the properties along the marsh on both sides, interior and exterior. So really challenging questions for all of us, for the selectmen, just as we have energy issues. And I pointed out in this handout, I hope you've taken a look at that, the town has made some significant steps. The Energy Committee, and I know there's some Energy Committee people here, maybe you'd raise your hands. Just how many do we have? One and one back there, and we've got 3 or 4 people. The Energy Committee, over the past 5-6 years, has made a number of recommendations. They've researched various actions and recommended to the selectmen, and the selectmen, in just about every single case, has approved those, and that's why it's important that they get recognition for that. Both groups of people get recognition for what they have done. But I think they both realize that there's a lot of difficult decisions ahead. And we wanted the selectmen and I to incorporate you in this process. That's why we have this meeting tonight. This really isn't a debate about climate change. That's settled. The question is, what do we do about it? How serious it is? How is it affecting your lives? What do you need to tell the selectmen? What kind of policies do we need? I mean, there's so many things. They've heard from me enough. I want to open it now to you. I'm going to start with Tim Smith because Tim has to speak at another meeting tonight in New Hampshire, so he's got to scurry out of here. So, Tim, if you would stand up, you can use the mic if you want, or you can speak aloud as you choose.
4 minutes? 4 minutes? Someone's going to have to yank me on this. 4 minutes. I'm serious. Anyway, my name's Tim Smith. I live in Wells. I worked for the Wells Reserve for over about 2 decades. And one of the projects we did at the Wells Reserve was we got a group of municipal officials to travel down to New Jersey in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy and talk to the municipal officials down there and tour the communities. And Wells was well represented at that. John Carter came along, Bob Foley came along, Owen Drummond came along, and we had another resident from Drake's Island. And it was quite an eye-opening experience to go down there. It was 20 months later. It was in June of 2014. And those communities were still under severe stress when we went and visited. And it just gave me an idea of what type of things can affect from climate change. They definitely had no doubt about it. You know, this was in the New Jersey Shore. They had had centuries of storms and experienced it. And yet this storm, which was, if you remember it, was barely a Category 1 when it came ashore. It just happened to be very big. For some reason, it was the largest storm. I think it was like 850 miles across on tropical winds. And it ran right into Long Beach Island and Tuckerman, and those communities were devastated. They're very similar to our community. They have a barrier beach, they have bridges over that, and they have a marshland inland, except theirs is about a magnitude bigger. They have about 2 or 3 miles across their bridge, where we only have a mile. But it's the same type of community, same tourist-based economy, and it was very difficult to recover from that. And the brunt of it fell on the municipal employees, and that's what we interviewed. And one of the things we noticed as we talked to the different communities was there was a huge difference in how these communities were recovering. And like was just beginning to the front, one of the communities that were doing well were the ones that took it by the horn, ones that took the initiative, and the communities worked together. When we went to Tuckerman, the guy said, you know, we had Irene the year before, and everyone got excited about Irene. You know, that was another storm that came out, but it missed the New Jersey coast. But they did a lot of planning work. They had like 2 weeks to get ready, but it missed, and it went up, and of course, it wrecked Vermont instead. But they had gotten ready for it, and those lessons weren't lost on the municipality. So when Sandy started coming along, they started getting ready. And we talked to the the town manager of Tuckerman, he said, and when the storm hit, the first thing he did was the next day is he went down to his local bank and said, how much money can I borrow? How much money? You know, give me all I can get. And the bank said, they worked with him, so the bank said, we'll give you a credit line of $5 million. Then he went back, he couldn't go back home, his home was wrecked. He couldn't go to the town hall was flooded. But he got on the phone as best he could, passed through to his employees in the town. And they started, what did they started doing? They started ordering dumpsters. They got as many dumpsters as they could find and started trucking them in from all parts of Pennsylvania and New Jersey, because they knew they were gonna need dumpsters. And it's a good thing they did that, because 10 days later, there wasn't a dumpster on the East Coast that wasn't already signed for. They also started cleaning up and established an area where all the rubbish would go and where they could sort it out. They communicated with the landowners that they wanted their rubbish sorted out to be recycled the best they could. Again, they saved millions and millions of dollars in the air because they sorted some of the trash out. And still, one thing they hadn't planned on was like their landfill, their community landfill, it filled, that one storm filled 14 months of space in their community landfill. And so a lot of it went like, and Long Beach Island was out on the island. Yes?
No, just 3 minutes.
I got one more?
Yeah.
Oh. But out on Long Beach Island, 8,500 homes were flooded on that island. 8,500. They left their homes on October 28th. It's funny, she said, when the municipality decided it was going to hit, they said all the emergency vehicles have to leave. So everyone they hired, all the employees came in, they're all driving over that 2-mile bridge. And what's happening going the other way? Well, the striped bass fishing tournament. Everyone is lugging their boats the other way. And of course they just, the town, you know, the head of the, you know, the highway department just thought it was just this odd traffic jam going on. And of course, there was no fishing tournament that week. Everyone lost their boats, but all the municipal vehicles were saved. Well, those people did not get back to their home until January 7th. They couldn't even go look at it. That means the bridge was closed. So one of the things about these storms is that the ones that prepared and the ones that stuck together just didn't like that. But these events do happen. Our past experience, what they kept saying, our past experience meant nothing to us. And they were the one that was in charge of Long Beach Island. She was the recycling coordinator. And they made her, I mean, every municipality official had to do a different job. And they had to do it, like she said, I expect to be doing this job, cleaning up from this for 10 years. And the town all said, we're going to be paying this for 17. So climate change is real, but they really felt there could be a huge difference. But we were down there 20 months. Some of the towns hadn't even started to clean up. They were waiting for FEMA to come in. FEMA took so long to get going. They couldn't go in there. At that time, there were no dumpsters available. You know, when we were down there, about a third of the houses had fully recovered. A third of the people were in the process of recovery, and a third of the people, the town manager says, we haven't even seen these people. It's been 20 months. We have never seen these people. They simply walked away from their properties. Either they've given up on their properties, or they've abandoned their properties, or they don't have flood insurance to pay for those properties, and they had just left. So the town manager says, every time I get a little bit of money in my budget, I simply call up the dumpster guys. They come and they just pull the buildings down and put them in the dumpster. I can talk a lot more, but I'm glad someone pulled it. But I can keep going. Thanks.
Got the gist.
Excellent.
Raise your hand if you do want to speak, and I'll call you. Give your name, and then we'll go ahead. So, yes, go ahead. If you want to use the mic, you can.
My name is Linda Stepopoulos. I've been a permanent resident, year-round resident of Wells since 2019, but I've been coming here my whole life. I have a house that's on the seaward side of the marsh, and I bought it with the full understanding of what could happen to that house in the next 10 to 50 years. I don't know that everybody who purchases seasonal housing here has that same understanding, and so we may want to look at disclosures for people who are purchasing real estate in Wells. I would like to recommend that Wells enact rules that require large building owners and public transportation operators to annually report their energy use, to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions over time, But I also encourage you to make sure that the rules are fair to the building owners and transportation providers who've already taken action to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And I also want to encourage you to think not just in the next 3 to 5 years, but the next 10 to 50 years about how we're going to have to migrate our real estate. Because we are, as a town, are going to have to make decisions about whether or not we're going to allow people to rebuild in areas that we know are going to be inundated within that 15-year time period. And so there's lots of options. One of them is hiking the house up. That gives you a couple more years. One of them is if it gets destroyed, don't rebuild, as some of the people in wherever Tin is. It's some of the people in New Jersey chose. The other one is to migrate people, buy back and then move people. So those are some of the things that we need to be talking about now in terms of proactivity. And I have the information about other places that we can use or modify processes that are already underway to do the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in cities like Boston, or even at the state level like Illinois and Colorado. Maine has been a leader in climate planning, and I also want to commend you all for the other steps that Wells has already taken that aren't listed in Joe's outline there, which include greening our school buses by the grant that we received to replace them with electric vehicles, and also the EV chargers that are right outside. And so I'm very proud to live in a town that's moving forward slowly. Too slow, but we are moving in the right direction, and so I wanted to thank you for that. And I'll just give you these.
And just as a quick note too, that was the school department for the buses.
Yes.
That's the only reason we didn't list it yet. There's a gentleman back here, that's right.
Hi everybody, my name is Ben Clough, I'm a Wells resident. I read with great interest the energy and sustainability elements for the updated Wells Comprehensive Plan, which I believe you took some time to put together, and the Energy Committee took some time to put together. And what I hope by my comments tonight is that we'll find some common ground, because I think to state that anthropogenic climate change is a settled science perhaps is a different viewpoint from what some people might have. I would like to submit, for the sake of your argument tonight, let's just say that's true. If that's true, some of the solutions that I think we're looking at are maybe not the most efficient solutions we should be looking at. So with that in mind, here's just a couple of facts that I'd list. Germany, which is one of the leaders in solar and wind in the EU, electricity prices there increased by 50%. In the other side of the camp, France, which is highly nuclear powered, which is a clean and zero emission nuclear energy, is almost 75%, and their electricity production is very low in its price. So it takes about 450 times more land for a solar farm compared to one nuclear power plant. So let's think about that. Also, solar panels require about 17 times more material, rare earth materials, including lithium and other things, which are mined mostly overseas, either in South America or over in China. And there's a lot of greenhouse emissions which are produced in the production of those materials. And we don't really have a plan to deal with a lot of those solar panels when their usefulness is done in 20 to 25 years. So what I would encourage you all to do is read two authors, Bjorn Lomborg and Michael Schellenberger. I assure you, they are people who are deeply concerned about the environment. They're deeply concerned about climate change. They have some really real, rational solutions that I think would behoove us all to take a look at. But in the meantime, I would say, don't sacrifice the environment in order to save the climate, right? So I do like some of the ideas that are proposed in this plan. I think some of the other ones and the timelines given are probably pretty unsustainable for the town, given the cost and how much it would take to get where we are, or to get where they propose. So, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, Brady.
Can you guys state your name when you go up to the mic too? I'm sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Sure thing. Hi, I'm Grady Roy. I'm a Wells High School senior, and I just want to briefly address the general state of affairs that we see here. It is both a good and bad thing that we're having a meeting like this tonight. Of course, it's always great to see local input and discussion concerning this topic. However, this topic is not a good thing, as continued climate change and inaction to it is still occurring. We, as both a community and as humans on the planet, cannot continue to sit and wait for the following generation to solve these problems. The issue of carbon emissions is now too much that the typical gradual gestures made by those who are maintaining power is now too little to solve anything. The Gulf of Maine is the fastest warming body of water in the planet, and it's been that for the past 4 decades. The incremental and reactionary actions and changes, though beneficial, are not the sole solutions. Of course, drastic changes may not be ideal for many in our community, and for many also across the globe. However, these are the choices that we need to make for global damage control. As we are in somewhat of an affluent area, it's important to note that the upper class carbon footprint is both significantly larger and more detrimental in terms of what we can be responsible for and manage as a town. And also, as long as 90 companies are responsible for 71% of all global carbon emissions, what we fight may seem too great. Of course, I don't want to be all doom and gloom, as there is hope for our future. I was fortunate enough to say a few words at the announcement that our school district, my school district, had won a grant to replace the current fleet of buses with electric vehicles, and that would significantly help our air quality in the town and also just the general southern Maine area. Once again, the fact that we all acknowledge our current situation demonstrates hope. The fact that we're all here is a great sign. However, we cannot get complacent, and this progress cannot afford to stall. At this point, climate change can't be reversed. There are a multitude of ways which are discussed, which Joe has been advocating for, which is awesome. It cannot be reversed. There are a multitude of ways we can adapt, amend, and potentially rectify our global situation. The climate crisis will not stop. The support and action seen here and now shouldn't either. Thank you again.
Yeah.
Dave Silly, well senior, just like you. I want to dispute climate change a little bit because climate change is going on forever. Climate warming, climate cooling. There's been 5 major ice ages. And technically, if you look it up, we were still in an ice age for the past 11,000 years. I mean, I see the things that are being done in Wells with all these ugly solar farms. What do we get out of that? What's the transition from our electric bills? There's nothing. You know, you're the leader of wokeism. That's all it is. Fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal are the engine of the world economy. There is no suitable replacement. And wind and solar, everybody wants to replace them eventually, but the technology is not there. So the rest of the world basically is laughing at the U.S. China produces a coal plant 1 a week. And Europe has gone back to burning wood, shoveling coal in the furnaces. So it didn't work for them, and they're finding it out. And all we're doing is bankrupting the country. You're paying more for gas, paying more for oil, and you're it's all good, well and good to be woke and climate worthy. But the fact is, there are problems right at Wells that could be more suitable. For example, the jetty is the reason there's not so much sand on the beaches, especially the north end of Moody Beach. All the north end of sand of Moody Beach is up against the jetty. If you go 10, 15 houses south side of the jetty, there's sandbanks that were never there. When I was a kid, we used to go see the fireworks at Drake's Island. You could walk across to Drake's Island on low tide. So some of this stuff could be corrected. So the rest of the world's paying lip service to climate change.
we're gonna lead it, but we're 1/20th of the world population. Whatever we do is gonna be minuscule in the long run. You should figure that out eventually. When you find out that you're paying $7 a gallon for gas and so forth. I know it's not with the typical rhetoric. Climate change, so I just wanna restate, is going on forever. Warming, cooling, we're not gonna stop it. And, you know, as far as electrifying everything, I like the speaker just spoke about the rare earth metals that are needed to supply all these buses and everything and so forth. Good, put a gold star on your forehead. But at the end of the day, you're gonna see this didn't work out. The rest of the world is laughing at it. Thank you.
I'm going to make a few corrections in what the gentleman said.
Oh, we gotta be careful.
I will be careful, but when he says something that is incorrect about science, I think it needs to be rebutted. We have had changes in climate throughout our 4 billion history here on Earth. Most of those swings have been natural, as you might say, because humans weren't around. The climate swung back and forth, but is it interesting that most of those swings took place over the course of hundreds of thousands and generally millions of years. Even during the last set of ice ages, which we have been in, and one might say we are in now, the swings have been on the order of tens of thousands of years, glacial periods running generally 100,000 years or more from onset to withdrawal. Right now, currently, we are seeing climate change on a pace that is far outpaced anything ever seen geologically on this Earth. It is taking place now in decades. We are having temperature rises throughout the planet that are taking place in the course of 10, 20, 30 years that we have never seen before. And the only explanation that the tremendous majority of the world's scientists have for that is the presence of gases in the atmosphere which trap heat. And I can explain the molecular process for that if you want to take the time. But gases such as methane and carbon dioxide have a structure that allows them to absorb energy in the infrared part of the spectrum, which is heat. And that heat has been steadily pushing up the temperature. And scientists understand the process, how this energy in the atmosphere drives the changes that we are seeing. So some of you are making statements, you're entitled to make them, but they will not go unrebutted. That's why some of us went to school, became scientists, so that we could advise town councils and so on difficult matters like this. You set the policy, but I can speak to the science. Who else would like to speak?
My name is Wayne Haas, I'm a retired engineer.
Take the podium.
May I stay here? You told me I could
Yes,
stay.
yes, tell me your name, please.
My name is Wayne Haas. I'm a retired engineer. I worked for Lockheed Martin, Pratt & Whitney for 35 years. I have a secret clearance, no big deal, but I worked on some pretty advanced stuff. And I think your rebuttal was just short of an insult, because this gentleman is absolutely right. Our New England area had a mile worth of ice. You can look this up yourself. A mile worth of ice over all of New England, 10,000 years ago. It melted. There was no fossil fuels, none whatsoever back then. So I don't know what you're talking about, the partial derivative, if you're a scientist, partial derivative of what happened here, but there was no fossil fuels in 10,000 years. We reduced a mile's worth of ice all over the entire New England. Second of all, my wife and I went down to Isle of Shoals. I sat there listening to geologists say, hey, we used to walk over to New Hampshire there, back in the 1700s. Not dated, but they could. There were no fossil fuels back in the 1700s. How did it raise up? There was no fossil fuels. You're the scientist, tell me, how did it raise up?
How did what reason?
How did the water level raise up back in the 1700s? How did the ice shelf a mile thick?
Would you like me to answer?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, but don't try to serenade us with all your molecular structures. Be honest to us. I'm just an average person, but no.
The Ice Age,
Mr. Hardy, just as a point of order, and this is what I meant with order. We have told the public that they will have 4 minutes. Now, I understand the gentleman asked a question. Now, if we want to answer the question, that's fine, but this is, I don't feel an appropriate time to do it because we only have 2 hours.
I think you're right.
But, okay.
Wait
Let's-
a second, now,
That's right.
I'm just passing out for those people, answer yourself.
Nope.
How did we melt a mile's worth of ice 10,000 years ago with no fossil fuels? It's been going, by the way, the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. There's no fossil fuels, this has been going on for years, just like this gentleman said. It's all in the textbooks. I don't know why people even question it. The percent, I mean, China building like he said.
You did have your 4
Yeah,
minutes.
sir.
You had your
Yeah.
4 minutes.
Well-
I'm not gonna rebut you.
No, it was 2 minutes.
Oh, this was a meeting that was called to give advice to the selectmen. Now, we said that you can offer your opinion, but we are not here to debate climate change.
Well, no, and this is, all right, here again, a point of order. I have explicitly stated when I opened this meeting that there's gonna be a diversity of opinions, and some of them may make us uncomfortable, whether it be one way or another. I certainly have my opinions, but I am not gonna abuse my authority as the chairman to shut somebody down or silence them or question them or put them on the spot when they speak. Now, you and I discussed this. I allowed you to be the moderator at this meeting because I know you're passionate about it. You brought forth a petition signed, and I respect that. We're here because we respect what the people have to say, regardless of what it is. Now, I do not want, and I will call to order, and I will shut the meeting down. If order is broken again, I am not going to allow the public to be disrespectful like that, one way or the other. I will put that out there right now. I value everyone in this room's opinion, and I will stick to it and insist on it. That is what I am here for. So I want to make sure that we stick to that. There's not one person, whether I agree with them, disagree, that, again, I'm going to seek the shutdown. I expect you to do the same as the moderator.
You want to finish, or we want to answer your question. You
No,
want to finish?
I'm just simply stating, I don't believe, I don't believe you're giving the whole truth to these wonderful people. The fact that we've had 4.5 billion years of cyclic going on is a fact. The fact that we lost a mile's worth of ice. You know what volume that is, a mile's worth of ice? How much energy, heat energy that takes? There were no fossil fuels. It's been going on for 4.5 billion years. I'm not denying that there's climate change. What I am adamantly denying is what contribution does mankind give to it? Very, very little. And whatever you do now with all these horrible solar dumps we have here, they're not going to do anything. They're not. I mean, those solar dumps are filled with toxic chemicals. California won't even allow some of those in there. Read about it. Do you know about the toxic chemicals in those?
I'm not going to respond to you. You make your statement. This is a
Well,
time
they're
for
filled with
statements.
toxic chemicals, you can check it out. You don't want any, that's half the reason they have the fences around it, because if you get close to that stuff, you're in trouble. Second of all, when you want to throw that stuff away, windmills only have a shelf life of 20, 25 years. You're gonna have to bury that. Where are we gonna bury all this stuff? Where are we gonna bury all these solar cells that have toxic chemicals? Do these people know it's full of toxic chemicals? No, because nobody tells them. It's time that Americans get the honest truth, because right now we're not getting. We have a cadre of people who are trying to push this agenda that has no physics background. You know what you know about physics? It has no background in physics. And I'll end it with that. And I hope I didn't upset anybody. I'm not a public speaker, but I felt compelled to come out here. I'm just a little old engineer. I'm not a public speaker like you are. And I apologize.
Bill Spiller.
Bill Spiller, Spiller Fountain and Wells. Just a couple of quick things I'd like to say.
Bill, you want to use the mic?
Okay. I think we should be pursuing,
Does that make a difference? Can you hear him better?
Yes.
you know, I'm glad that we are pursuing renewable energy. I hope it's done carefully and correctly so we don't poison the environment with the byproducts of it. And another thing I'd like to bring up, for a long time I've been a proponent of tidal power. That's power that comes in here twice a day. Doesn't matter if it's raining, sun, or anything else. And, I know when I was a kid, I was up to Passamaquoddy Bay, but Franklin Roosevelt was trying to put that tremendous power station in. It would have probably furnished all the power for New England. I don't hear anything about anyone looking at that now. I was at Eastport, they put up a turbine, found it wouldn't work, it only had it so turned one way and everything else, but it was, you know, when I look at it, he said it was poorly designed. So I would like the Energy Commission to look at a title. So I say it's twice a day, doesn't depend on the weather. Another thing on the climate change, I'll speak as a farmer. I have a farm up in Wells Branch. I don't see much change in the climate in the spring. You know, the frost dates about the same as they always have been. Everything seems to be similar. In the fall, I think we're getting a couple weeks more frost-free weather. To me, that's a tremendous plus. So I think we have to look at both sides of this climate change and see how we can adapt to it, because we're not going to stop it. As the people said here, I follow history a lot. One's history of Wells and Kennebunk tells about how from 1600 how the sea level has been rising. You know, Kennebunk Beach in Colorado area had a cow yard. But why it's called a cow yard, it used to be a cow pasture. It's all underwater now. It was an island off Wells's long ago. So this is something that's been happening, and I don't think we can stop it. I think we just have to learn to live with it and make changes so we can adjust to it. Thank you very much.
No, if we have time, we can come back to you.
I have a question.
Well, we'll take statements now, questions are later on.
We're gonna have a comment period, just so we figured just for the point of order, keeping things kind of in line, that we'll do comments first and then questions after. That way, we can gather questions in a coherent fashion and make sure that there's a response that's given later on.
So for other comments or statements, yep, Bill?
Hi everyone, I'm Bill Hardy. I'm a former board member of the Natural Resources Council of Maine. We have done, as a board, tons of work with communities all up and down the coast of Maine, working with towns, seeing what they're doing for climate resiliency, seeing what they're doing with budgets, seeing how they can help their communities, help their businesses. And the big thing that has stood out to me is how towns are using the money that is readily available from grants from the state, federal money, to help their communities economically adapt to the climate change crisis. We don't have a huge fishing industry in Maine, but we have a lot of restaurants that are counting on all the seafood that comes into the Gulf of Maine. A lot of those crustaceans, they're moving north. The lobster industry in New York State is dead because all the lobsters have gone north and now they're moving up into Canada. So I'm excited to talk about how the board and the town can use money that's available to us to adapt. Regardless of your opinion on climate change, money is there, and those are great conversations to have.
Bill?
Somebody else back here that had a hand up.
I had
A question?
Just about if there's an alternative arena that you might suggest for the more specific scientific questions and debates that might arise over this. That's all. Just if there's a separate arena.
We
where
don't have a
people might
separate
be able
forum,
to-
they can take that under advisement.
All right, I was just wondering for people to settle some of the more, hard
It's a good question.
scientific questions and maybe cut back on some of the.
We don't have an answer for that right now,
Right.
sir. Who else would like to speak? Craig?
Hi, my name is Craig Merrow, and I've lived here in Wells since 1995. One of the big takeaways, regardless of reviews on climate change, is we should all take more active interest in how we use our resources. Using them well, using them wisely. Just little goes a long ways, and if we stop stop and think about how we use the resources every day, and how can we reduce that, we use it better, that can make a big difference. And I think that's something, if nothing else, that should be one of the biggest takeaways, thinking about what you're doing to the planet, and how can you reduce your impact on it. Thank you.
Chris Chase. I think we're looking at in a little bit of a wrong way to look at things. The planet isn't going to go anywhere. It's the human race that's going to go somewhere. So we need to look at it that way. The planet's going to live through whatever happens. It always does. It lived through the dinosaurs coming and going. It lived through everything. So it's the humans that are going to disappear, not the planet. So protect yourself.
Sally?
Sally Morse. I have a concern, or I'd like to know what all our efforts have gained us in terms of monetary efficiencies, if you will. This whole solar farm thing, which I'm not enamored by, it's ugly as sin. And I question how much am I saving, because my electric bill keeps going up. So it would really be nice to know all of our efforts and have sort of a year-end report on what the result has been, to hopefully convince me that more of that is a good thing, or to convince me that maybe we should rethink things. And I am concerned about when you said you were going on 9B. It's an area that we've had 2 failed projects on. Well, one big failed project, it was the old dump, and so we put affordable housing on an old dump. And back then, Martin and his father said, who would build on an old dump? Well, they wanted to put the high school on that dump. This is, the way people think, and we're kind of just going about our lives, and we need a new school, so hey, here's some money. But there were consequences, and it was an old dump that wasn't closed very well, a bunch of sand on top of it. And as a result, it contaminated the water. So the townspeople had to pay to run water up there. Then, all of a sudden, the garbage is coming up through these people's lawns. So the townspeople had to buy out all these people that had a federal loan. We didn't give them the money. The feds gave them the money to build on this place. So we bailed out the feds too, really. And we bought out all these people, which was the right thing to do, but let's not. Then we put this solar panel place there. Well, I actually have the tree farm across the river. And with all of the fencing and all of this stuff, and if you've been by it, it doesn't look natural. I wonder what the wildlife on my tree farm's doing, because they used to have a nice runway, and it's now been cut off. So it's changed the dynamics for the wildlife, and I noticed on TV tonight, the wildlife people are getting concerned about these huge solar panel farms, which are altering their habitats dramatically. So it doesn't seem fair to be perhaps impinging on them too. So I would like more information. I would like to be convinced that this is the route to go. I would like to know what the end result will be, because we've had a lot of waste issues over the years, and I would like to think a little bit harder about what we do and where we put it. Thank you.
So that the information about savings there, I and others could easily calculate for you how much carbon dioxide is being kept out of the atmosphere by 5 megawatts or 10 megawatts of solar farm. That's information that could be.
And also, isn't there some money that's being paid? Somebody's getting money somewhere for these solar farms.
Well, the town of Wells is.
Yeah, so I'd like to know that, and is it a 20-year payoff? Is it, and how come you know, how are we gonna know that that's impacting our bottom line?
The financial questions you could direct to them.
Yeah, but I mean, this
yeah.
is where you can work together.
Yes, the energy savings, or not the energy savings, but the
footprint.
the CO2 emissions that are being saved from it, you know, that, as I said, that can be calculated, but would that make a noticeable difference in town? No, because it's a tiny fraction of a huge picture, so it wouldn't be convincing to you.
Well, you know, in the scheme of things, we need to be convinced.
Who else would like to speak?
I might say one more quick thing as a statement.
Well, no one else is, you may.
Just as I'm here.
What's your name?
My name is Allison Marchand. I do live down the road in Wells, across from Spiller Farm actually, so it's right here. So I was just thinking, I hear a lot of people talking about how ugly some of these things are, and I can't help but think that we've actually been quite lucky. I love this area. My fiance here, Dustin, loves this area, and it is beautiful, and we've been spared a lot of some of the eyesores that I think a lot of communities haven't been so fortunate to be spared of. Like if you see the pictures of oil pumps and things like that in other people's communities that they love that were beautiful to them, I just think that we've been fortunate to be spared that. So there's the element of the eyesore. I don't know the scientific benefit necessarily, but I just think that it's important to keep that in mind. Other communities haven't been as lucky, and they do have to deal with the eyesores that we benefit from today, if that makes sense. So that's all I got.
Here, I'll follow it up.
All right.
So my name is Dustin Bateman. I'm with her. I've lived here since 1988. She's lived here for 5 years.
Lifetime resident.
The town used to be a lot better looking without the solar farms, honestly. Now I drive around, you know, you look behind the bank, you're driving down 109, huge solar farm there. I don't like it. You're driving down 9B, another huge solar farm. Cut across from 109 to Route 9, another huge solar farm. Are we getting in money for that? I like Sally's question. I'd like to know the financials on
I
that.
think we're getting, correct me if I'm wrong, about $80,000 a year from those two solar installations, is that correct?
We actually just amended one of the leases the other night. I believe Mike, was about $650 an acre.
I believe it is. I don't have the firm numbers, but Sally, I heard your question, and we certainly will provide that. They actually started on the Littlefield Solar, which is on
9B, that's on the old transfer station.
that just started generating late October, so we'll start to see what that revenue looks like, and we will show you what the rent is as well, and the property taxes associated with the solar panels and all, so we'll calculate that for you.
Yeah, if my memory serves me correct, we just talked about that Tuesday night. That particular installation, I believe, is down to around, call it 21 acres, I think, was the amended lease, at about $650 an acre. Plus, I believe when we read it originally too, there was some profit that was made off of the energy generation too. Yeah, can't remember what that was.
Mark?
Well, I'm not done,
I was
actually.
just offered $2,000 an acre.
What, sorry.
And I told him,
Mr.
not as long as I drew a breath.
Yeah. Mr. Bateman?
Yeah. She also asked, you know, how they might impact. I'm sure the people that own houses around there are worried about their property value, right? I would be. So, I'm talking. So, the next part of it is that, so I work at Horseman Naval Shipyard. I work in the nuclear engineering and planning department there. I know a lot about nuclear power. I'm not an engineer, but I do know about it. I would never speak of things so matter of fact as I'm hearing them up here right now. That is crazy. You know, if I was a chemist, I would not pretend that climate change is settled. I know all the answers, and that there's no open discussion about that right now. So, I just want to say that.
I did not say I know all the answers.
Right, you said it was settled.
I did say that.
Okay, you were wrong.
Right.
One more thing?
No, the question, we're gonna wait on the questions, please.
Okay.
And I don't want this, again, as John said, you can ask questions sort of a general nature regarding what the town is doing on these matters, not to me. It's not my session.
If you, but to that end, during our comment period, if nobody else wants to speak and we have time, you will be allowed to speak again, should you want to.
Thank you, John. Who else?
I'm sorry. Again, just to clarify, so there will be some resources provided for people who do at the end of this, so that people who have those long extenuating questions will have a resource to go to after this. You know, like a,
We don't have a follow-up plan for this meeting.
So,
I just mean where people can go to have maybe more in-depth debates if they wanna get down to the nitty-gritty of the science of it all and the things that are raised here that aren't strictly policy, that are coming
so
up.
would you be looking for an answer to the questions that will be posed this evening, or would you be are you inquiring as to a more informal venue to sort of have a back and forth discussion about overall ideas?
If there is one available, yeah, or like, maybe if it's on the town website or something like that, or just if there are resources, if people will have kind of an avenue to look more in depth and get some of these unanswerable questions maybe more resolved.
Sir?
Tell the young lady, this is a library, there's a bunch of books right in there, we can answer the questions right in there.
Well, I mean, I think, you know,
Just the actual factual, the library's right there.
well, all of us
I
in
don't
the
mean that,
library.
no, I'm not saying
is
that
looking
outside.
for the
I'm
debate.
saying that's the library.
That's, ma'am, would you like to speak? Look, come up here, please, it's hard to hear you.
I was just gonna bring back the fact that we have an energy committee, so that if people do have questions, they can address them. And maybe that, because we have a committee, they can work with the selectmen and they can work representing the questions.
Good point, thank you. Did anyone from the Energy Committee want to respond to that? You don't need to, but if you wanted, you can. All right, ma'am, did you want to speak?
Yeah.
I'm Linda Littlefield Grenfell, and you have an incredible resource here in the town of Wells, the Wells National Estuarine Research Reserve at Lodholm. I'm sure between people like Linda and myself, and we can name lots of other people who would be happy to host a discussion that would give you room to look at the science and where we agree and where we disagree. I think that finding common ground is wonderful, and I'm delighted to have so many people here tonight because this is really critical stuff. And I've been working on, here's a common ground area for all of us to work on that probably we would not have too much disagreement on, and that would be native plants. Native plants. And I'd be happy through the Wells Reserve to offer an opportunity to talk about that resource as well.
Thank you.
And just to try to answer your question, because I do feel it was important, I think what you're asking about is just in terms of, is there a committee or something like that where there'd be an exchange of ideas, is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of that take place here.
Yeah, so this is sort of what that's about to an extent, but the Energy Committee does, I don't want to speak for them, but they engage in quite a bit of that, and they would probably be a good resource for you. That would be-
Yeah, or just for anybody here who's, it's a heated debate, of course, no matter how much material people have taken in, so, yeah.
Yeah, I believe the chair of the Energy Committee, Beth, is right here, so
Yeah.
she might be a good one
And
to
I like
connect
what
with.
the person who just spoke had to say too.
Yes, we'd be welcome to hear from you, and we can attend the meeting, meet once a month. We're always looking for new ideas and ways to approach reducing our carbon output is really what we're focusing on, reducing energy use, pushing toward renewable energy, not necessarily one type of renewable energy, but exploring what our possibilities are. And we're always looking for public input and welcome anyone to attend our meetings. And we have a presence on the town website, so you can find us there.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Yes.
I just briefly, Nancy Ford, I've been in Wells for 22 years now. those buildings. Adaptation is something we are not talking about. And ways to protect our fronts, our ocean front, and everything else, okay? Netherlands has been underwater for a long time. They have managed to adapt to that, okay? But what I'm hearing also tonight is, and I want to approach this from the instance of tidal, which I agree with, by the way, that should be looked at. We should also be looking at the small nuclear reactors now that are very efficient, can be locally positioned, and could probably power this whole town with no problem. Okay, now the other thing is, one of the things, Maine restricts the amount of hydropower that we can use for electricity. That should be unleashed immediately. Clean, natural hydro. Tidal, hydro, small nuclear. Before we go with all of these, basically not natural, when you have to do solar panels and wind turbine, that is not natural compared to tidal and hydro. So those are the things we should be considering. Adaptation and other alternatives to things that are effectively not clean, either in their manufacture or their disposal. And the other thing is, where do we get the extra electricity needed to run all these extra EVs and heat pumps? We have to get it from somewhere. And if we're going to less electric output from wind and solar, where are we going to get it for the other things that we run on electricity? We just put in heat pumps, okay? So we are trying to do that, but it's not going to be powered by wind and solar. So that's a problem too. And the other thing you're saying, the carbon emissions are being reduced, but you did not take into account what it took in carbon production to make them, as been mentioned here tonight. And I was in scientific publishing for like 30 years in New York. And I'm telling you, science has never settled.
Just a reminder, please, if we're going to address anyone, please address the chair. That's me. Just to make sure, we don't want to make anything personal. I understand, again, there's probably some debate that could take place, but we need to make sure we stay on point. Being said, we've got about 5 more minutes, I would say, of the comment period. I want to try to split it right down the middle. We'll move to questions at 7 o'clock. If we get through the questions relatively quick and there's some more comments, we'll go back to the comments. Like I said, I just want to make sure we have time for everything.
I would say in response to several questions that we can have a discussion about setting up some kind of a forum to discuss in more detail the science of climate change, if that might be of interest to people. But again, we'd have to have some interest shown in that. Other questions? I'm sorry, are there other statements before we move to the question period?
Which guy? Yeah, this gentleman right here, if there's nobody, we're good.
Is that a statement or a question?
It's a statement.
Okay.
I think you should address this too. We seem to be getting a smattering of the truth about climate change and a lot of other stuff that is actually not truthful. And I would hope that, for instance, as an example, obviously you from the Navy really know what's going on. It takes 4 times the kilowatt hours, 4 times, for you to charge your electric vehicle at night at your house, 4 times the kilowatt hours than it does to turn your central air conditioning on at the same amount of time. 4 times. You imagine how much that's going to cost you every night? You get an electric car, you plug it in, your bill's going to go up a significant amount. If you drive an electric vehicle and you're going to go over 200-300 miles, you better be ready to sit tight for about 5, 6, 7 hours until it charges. So if you want to go on vacation to New York or Florida or whatever, you're going to have to go 5, 6, I don't know, 400 miles, sit there and wait 8 hours, and get up the next day and go. It's just not common sense to do that. It's going to disrupt your personal life. You can list about, those are the facts. People are not getting the facts about this stuff. You listen to a lot of people talking about climate change and this and the earth. That's been going on for 4.5 billion years. You can look that up. Well, how is it going to affect you? When you have to spend 4 times the amount of kilowatt hours to do your car as opposed to your air conditioning, you're going to be hurt, all of us. So I'll leave it at that. By the way, you're very good company.
Before we go to questions, John, I will carefully make a correction to something you said about, since I have 2 electric vehicles, my daughter has an electric vehicle, you can charge through it with a level 3 charging station, about 30 to 40 minutes of full charge for 250 miles.
How much that car cost?
Well, it costs about a third of the price of gas, sir.
60,000, 70,000, people can't afford that.
I said, how much the car cost? We paid $30,000. And you can get a level 2 charger, which is what we have at the library for a full charge. That's what we have at home. Overnight, we get a full charge in our car. You can use a trickle charge from a 110 outlet. That takes 30 hours. So you got 3 levels of charging.
Stand corrected. If you had to buy a new battery, how much for your car? $7,000?
It isn't a single battery, it's a whole comp.
But how much would the whole thing? Because it only lasts 7 years.
No, that's not correct. They last varying lengths of time.
Energy Department says.
They'll say different things, but you can get electric cars that may run 10 years, they may run 15 years. I think maybe the jury's out just on how long the batteries
New
last.
Tesla batteries are about $8,000, and you have to do it every 7 years.
Okay, folks.
I don't want to get into that, I just correct, you want to speak, sir?
Yeah,
please.
And then we'll stop and go to questions.
Okay, I'm going to speak to a couple of things. My name is Jim Smith. I've been in Wells for probably 15 years now. I have solar panels on my barn, 30 panels on my barn, and I have 20 panels on my house. I have heat pumps that supplement my oil heat, and I have 2 electric vehicles. My electric bill is $13 a month for 11 months of the year. And then 1 month, I let it run the heat pumps full time, so I don't give energy back to CMP for free. So basically, I'm heating my home about probably 40–50% of it from electricity that's generated from my solar panels. I'm driving 2 EVs. They happen to be Teslas that charge overnight, and it costs me nothing because I'm still paying $13 a month. I drive the EV on long trips a lot of times. I've driven to Florida a couple of times. When I pull into a charger, by the time I get out of the vehicle and I go to use the restrooms, and my wife does, and maybe we pick up a snack, the car is charged. I don't know about anybody else, but you don't usually drive long trips more than 3 hours without stopping for a bathroom break. So the time that it takes to charge the car is nothing. So I guess my point is, there is an upfront investment. The panels on the barn have been there 7 years. They have already paid for themselves. The panels on the house have been there a little more than 4 years, and they're about halfway towards paying for themselves. Granted, it requires an upfront investment for that kind of thing, but in the long haul, it's an investment that's going to more than pay off. The concern about what's going to happen with solar panels when they exceed their useful life is probably 20 years. There's a general degradation, as with the Tesla batteries. There's a general degradation over time. The battery should last about 10 years. But if I was just using the car locally, I could, for local driving, I could probably get 15, 20 years out of that. But on a long trip, I would need a bigger battery. So my reason for doing that was twofold. One is I am concerned about the environment, and having fluorocarbons and gasoline or diesel emissions in the atmosphere, primarily because of my grandchildren. I'm more concerned about them than what it's going to cost me. I would rather invest in their future, quite frankly. So a lot of things that you hear. Well, you talk about, what are you going to do with the total solar panels. Well, what do people do with vehicles?
Recycle.
You talk about ugliness. Have you ever looked at telephone poles? I mean, for crying out loud. I mean, there's some things that you just live with that aren't, you know, maybe it's a little bit displeasing to you, but is it gonna kill you, man? It's probably not. Just a point of view.
So we're gonna shift. Do you want to take a break, John, or for a few minutes?
Let's keep rolling just to make sure that everybody gets a chance. Like I said, I want to make sure it's very important that everybody has their voice heard.
All right, so questions are not to me. They are to the to the front of the room. And if a question can be answered by the town manager or by someone, a selectman who chooses to answer it, that's fine. They may not choose to answer. They're not to be forced. They're not to be put in a position where they've got to defend themselves. But if they can answer something, they will. And if not, they can make notes of it. We got a recording, and perhaps they can research it and get the answer for you. Yes.
I would be interested in knowing if we have any access to nuclear power, either regionally or independently.
Not sure if Seabrook feeds in here.
Except that I don't know much about the future of nuclear power, except I understand that they are making much smaller plants, much more efficient plants. And is that possibly something that could come into southern Maine and make all of southern Maine?
In theory, Sally, I mean, there was a long pause in nuclear plant construction.
Right.
And there's certainly a lot of articles now in journals and so on about these smaller plants. And I expect they probably will be planned. It takes a long time, even for small ones, to get them approved. Bill Gates has got a company that's investigating and designing smaller nuclear plants.
I think France is going.
Some other countries are. So it's certainly a possibility in probably within a decade that we will see some.
Well, there was a pause in building them because they last so long.
I mean, can't hear you.
Pause in building them because they last so long. That's the whole point, right?
Chris, so how we'll do this, I'll just, if you have a question, put your hand up. I'm gonna go ahead and call on the respective people. That way we can, where our representative here, Mike, is taking notes of the questions. That way we can make sure that that's happening. If we hear a question. Chris, you had a question?
Question I have is on the solar panels that we already have. Has anybody, the contract runs out in 25 years with them, 20 or 25 years?
It's like 25 or 30 years.
Right, so the contract runs out at the end of that. So I would assume that they would have to clean the property up. Something is gonna have to be done with what's left of those solar panels in 20 or 25 or 30 years. Has there been a cost brought forward at today's rate of what it would cost to clean that up? That money figured out with interest of 3%, things going up roughly 3% or 5% or 10%, whatever you think a good rate is. So that at the end of the project, is there money put away from this company that we rented to dispose of that equipment? Or are we gonna be stuck on the hook?
I believe
in
it's
30.
No, it's in the
Are we gonna be-
contract, I think. I don't know what it is, Chris.
I'm not done.
Yeah, sorry.
At the end of 30 years, is the town of Wells, I would have to look at the contract, because I think what it turns over to the town of Wells. And I know when I was on the board, we did research on the solar panels, and solar panels are at the end of their major life cycle at that time. So they'll either need a major upgrade or be completely disposed of. And all this money that we're saving, is that gonna equal what it's gonna cost us to dispose of all this stuff? And if not, I wanna know where the money's gonna come from. It shouldn't be coming from this company. They've got a huge government check to come install all these things, and they'll be defunct and go out of business. They've already changed names a couple times, have they not? So the names changing has already started, so that company's gonna be gone, it's gonna be belly up, it's gonna be Chapter 11. And we need money in there now where they're still thinking they're all proud and doing a great thing, and have money put away today to take care of our future.
And I can't answer all the specifics. Mike will work on the specifics for you, Chris, but I can tell you that that question was raised, and I did speak at the time with the town manager, and I was assured at the time that that company was going to be responsible for any and all cleanup costs. Now, I understand what you're saying, because here again, I had heard tales that that company was getting liens filed against our property for non-payment of vendors. So I'm personally not real keen on what happened up there, but I'll leave it at that.
But we need to have something in place today so that we don't get bit in 30 years. Now, I'm not sure I'm gonna be here in 30 years. I'd like to think I might be, but I don't wanna all of a sudden we already paid for that damn dump once, and it cost us millions of dollars. Are we gonna pay for that dump again?
I have a question over here.
There is a notebook in the clerk's vault that, that company has, built, and they are gonna dismantle it in the end. But if you want to look at all the information, it's a nice thick notebook.
I
And
would
I don't
have-
know if anybody knows that, so I'm letting you know.
Thank you.
There is a notebook in the clerk's vault.
Thank you. This gentleman back here had a question.
I saw that you were all taking notes. I wonder what suggestions you've heard so far. I've heard nuclear, tidal, hydro, a few other questions. What other suggestions have you heard?
The notes that I was taking primarily was, again, just keeping order. You know, that Mike was taking a lot of notes. I will tell you with some of the notes that I took, in particular with tidal power, recycling and use, which this gentleman had brought up. I think I wrote use, actually. Would you say that's probably best in terms of how we consume resources? Yeah. Okay, so I took that one. Concerns, solar farm financial impact for the town and impact of projects on wildlife. There's a couple areas that I had identified, so I have a couple points from there.
We got some questions over here. Yes. Your name, please?
Kim Macero. My question, if you're talking about waste, you have to talk about nuclear waste also. And we've sent it to other states have had to bury it. What does Wells plan to do if we have this small plant? What do we do with our nuclear waste?
Yes.
No, take the lady next to you.
It's more.
Name?
My name is Karen Cameron, and resident of Wells. Just one more to add on to the question of selectmen. I know I heard really good stuff about residents, property. Are those in your notes? Residents, properties, mitigation efforts?
I will tell you that those are all in my notes, as
Okay,
well as
thanks.
the idea of perhaps a disclosure for buyers that came from Linda. Mitigation efforts regarding real estate. I have a number of those that we talked about. So not all encompassing, but certainly in the video we'll review back to some of those
Great, thank you very much.
recommendations.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. Jim.
There was a study done, I think it had to do with the property along the beach property. Basically, the residences along the beach and the effect of those properties with sea level rise. If the sea level does rise to a certain point, that the town of Wells would have a shortfall in revenue from property taxes of a certain percentage. I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but it seems like that's something that on the horizon we should be looking at, because it would, if you took the properties along the beach, which is basically why those of us who don't live in the beach areas, property taxes are a lot lower. If you take 60% of that and make it go away, what's that going to do with the property taxes that are going to go? So sea level rise is an issue, and if you want to make it a monetary issue, it's a big one.
So is the question in terms of how have we looked at and assessed that to date?
Yeah, and are we looking at that going forward to be prepared for that?
Thank you.
Back to you in the, yeah, go ahead.
If the sea level rises, also the rivers and the brooks, they all rise. So all property that's near that water is gonna be also dangerous.
Go ahead.
Does the town have any data on sea levels?
Oh,
Can we get that published or something so we can see what it is? You know, what's
There is
been
a
over the
flood-
last 100 years?
There's a
200 years?
floodplain map.
yeah, you wanna,
Southern Maine Planning District, which we work with in all of the coastal communities. Mind you, I've been here 3 weeks, but I do know that Wells has participated in a 6-town consortium in that, and so Wells has been mapped out of what potential sea level rise, how it will impact your community. I believe there are actually economic factors that have been attributed to that. So at certain sea level rises, what will be the impact economically on those properties, which then, as you point out, can force the financial impact further inland. And so that information is available, and that's stuff that we probably should be getting from SMPDC and put up on a website that everyone can view.
But if we lose, to a point to that, if we lose 60% of the beach, we're gonna qualify for state aid then. Right now, we don't qualify for any state money. So there's gonna be some relief coming through the state, so
That's one way to
everybody in the
look.
state will pay.
yeah.
Sure.
To that end, I can tell you, so before I ran for the select board, actually I ran and lost to Tim once, but after that, I decided I'd run for the sanitary district, and it's a theme that I've seen across Wells. It's been pretty impressive as resiliency planning, and as part of that, those studies are done, and even our sanitary district is quasi-municipal, so they're run for their own board, and they've taken it very seriously, and they've assessed their infrastructure and the cost, and there's a lot of modeling that's been done to that end across all departments, so that is something that's been a particular point of pride.
Linda, does a reserve have research and information that could be shared or has
I
been
work
shared with?
with Southern Maine Development and Planning and Climate Ready Coast. And I found it hard to find. I think it would be really nice if the town would work with these resources and get that information so it's easily accessible. Because even I have found it hard to go through and find, there's a ton of maps through Climate Ready Coast that do the assessment of the economic impact on everything imaginable. But I want something a little more summarized.
If I may offer too, I was on a call with SMPDC today, Southern Maine Planning, myself and Carol Murray, our Public Works Director, and so Wells has qualified for a $10,000 grant under what's called the Community Resilience Partnership. And so we are working with SMPDC to help us bring forward what that application process would look like. That will come before the select for their consideration, and then we have the opportunity to pursue that and actually acquire dollars through the state that are available if that's the appetite of the board and therefore the community. So we're working on all of that. I spoke with SMPDC if they would be willing to come and present to the board on the topics you're all bringing up, and they certainly are willing to do that. I believe 1 or 2 of their members have already at some point, they said, presented. And so that may be another opportunity for the community if supported by the board.
Yeah, that was a little while ago, I remember that meeting.
Yeah.
Sal?
This gentleman had his hand up first.
While we're in this area, what would be the impact upon the economy? If we don't have beaches, I think that will impact the tourist trade. I think that will have a major impact on us. And what is selectmen planning to do? What are the plans for the town in that regard, as we might be having to do a major shift of our whole economy?
So an economic impact, so to speak.
Well, you're looking at community resiliency, but we also want to look at coastal sustainability. And part of that is a mitigation program, and that's, again, working with the state, the feds, SMPDC, on how we can take steps to mitigate some of the impact that coastal storms are having. Now, at some point, I worry that FEMA will eventually just pull the plug and say, we repaired it 2 or 3 times. And so those are the things, and it started out, your discussion tonight, about preparedness and planning for the future. And so that's something that I feel an obligation to do and then bring back to my bosses for them to be able to present to you if they choose on that. So those wheels are in motions in weeks 1, 2, and 3. And I promise you that they'll continue and come back to the board for consideration.
Well, and actually, correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't know, I know that you just started full-time in, but I believe you might be able to answer it talking with Carol, but didn't we apply for FEMA money for 2 of the seawalls down at the beach where it got denied because it wasn't?
I understand that happened, I don't have the details.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So that ended up. Some more.
One suggestion is that if you get these maps, they have a nice place to display them out there in the hall, and maybe you could, through the paper, notify us that they're gonna be up for a couple of months or something, we can go look at them.
And I know a lot of those are available if we were to post those on the town's website, perhaps under the energy efficiency or the energy committee tab, and easily viewable online, but also to have something in hard copy.
It's nicer to see them bigger.
Understood. I went to readers
More
about
of it
3
than
months
that.
ago.
Yes, Linda.
We're talking about mitigation, adaptation, resiliency, and I'm sure there's been an equal amount of discussion about salt inundation to the water table. We're talking about properties when the seas rise around the ocean and the rivers, but we're already seeing salt inundation in fresh water. And so that would be a question for the town to clarify. I know there's been work done, but more work, and how do we access that information as well?
So along those lines, so there are people who are already changing from well water to town water because of the saltwater inundation in their wells. So if we know how many wells how many people are on well water, that would be another piece that I would ask you to look at. What would it cost to build out the town water supply to cover people when their wells get inundated?
So KKW controls that, yeah, and that would be their.
So how many are on town water, and then we can back into it.
John, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
In terms of the marsh, the seawalls, the properties along the shore, has there been talk about beginning to set aside funds, a bank, like you have a capital improvement fund, funds for these things that are going to be with us 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the road? Because some of these projects are going to be terribly expensive. And I wonder if we're starting to work on funding for those things.
I just got here.
What are you looking for?
Well, certainly, I imagine you're talking about a reserve account that could be applied in some fashion. And again, that comes back to the board, the budget board, ultimately you, the legislative body, to make that decision.
Well, and to a degree, we'd have to separate. So we have town water and sewer down there. The sewer department's obviously planning for their assets. I would imagine if the water department was to incur any sort of damage, that they've been planning for that. Both parties have been pretty proactive. To a degree, that private property is affected. Again, I don't know if the town would be responsible for private property. That would be either the individual or the insurance company. As far as our infrastructure, then, I mean, I guess we could, jot that question down and see there's an idea as far as roads and seawalls and all that. But we've funded that typically through, had 2 bonds that we put out, funding that through that process now.
And I don't know if the latest iteration of the FEMA flood maps have been supplied to wells that may have been. So those are areas to look at as well.
Aaron, there was actually, I believe, now back the flood maps actually, didn't they? There was insurance.
Yeah,
They changed.
it rates the insurance, but then aren't they still in the appeal process?
They are. They're still in the appeal.
Yes, Mr. Hardy.
Just want to make sure that those 2 tangible steps weren't overlooked. So make the flood maps more available, easier to access on the town website, and available here in the library. Is that?
I think that would be great.
2 good steps?
Right.
Okay. Making sure information is available.
Other questions?
I have a question too. I guess, is there any data published from CMP on, let's say that next year, every single house in Wells had EV hookups in their house? How would that impact the electrical bills, availability of electricity, and the whole grid in general? It'd be nice for CMP to put some data out on that, right? Obviously, they would have to manage that as it gets implemented over a period of 10 years. So is there any data like that? Can we provide the data?
Restate that for me about what you'd be interested in seeing.
So it's kind of like, how is CMP prepared to handle that much more activity on their electrical grid?
Okay.
Right?
Or
So
the grid expansions
yeah,
necessary.
I mean, you guys are talking 2030, I think, right? So it'd be like a 10-year, but what if in 5 year, every resident of Wells in similar towns, 70% had EV hookups? Would they be able to handle that? Would we have rolling brownouts? Who knows, right? So
If I can take that. The state of Maine has a climate resiliency plan plan, so they have those numbers that come out. CMP mainly handles the transmission, but to calculate the actual usage is coming from Janet Mills's climate initiative plans that they have. So.
Does it speak to like people's electrical bills?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really what people are concerned about. So. It's interesting. It would be nice to get it all in one place in the town website.
Well, so the last time, like I said, we had a forum similar to this where it was a little sort of, it was different than a town meeting, was for the issue with increasing crime down on Route 1. We got the information out after the fact. We took some, tried to answer as best we could and publish that on the town website. So it seemed to work pretty well last time. We'll do it again this time. Mr. Wheeler, did I see you had your hand up?
Yeah, I did. A few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, I saw a letter, a list of recommendations that Mr. Harding gave to the town on how he wants to mitigate it. And on there was something in the order of, I mean, I read it, you wrote it and gave it to the town.
Can you explain what?
So correct me if I'm wrong, just hear me out. I believe on this piece of paper it mentioned something about by the year 2030 or 2035, an ordinance that would require every person in Wells to have an EV or solar panels. Is that something that the town would be doing, an ordinance or a mandate? Because as far as I'm concerned, I will not be told what I have to do. I just would like to know if the town would be doing that.
Well, I don't mind answering that. I'm not for mandates. I would not mandate that. I couldn't afford to do it myself, so.
I think these were general energy goals for the town. These weren't mandates.
I'm just saying, things have a way of turning into stuff like that.
He's been around.
Recommendations become policy at some point, so.
You may not be able to buy a gasoline car in 15 years.
You might not be able to buy an EV in 15 years. I mean, at one point, we had paper bags. And then they were like, oh, we're cutting down too many trees. So we switched to plastic, and now we're back to paper. So it seems to kind of go back and forth all the time.
Some things do.
And to make, a lot of things do, but.
Other questions?
I just want to offer that some of the broader, like regional stuff that's not just the town of Wells, you can find some more information on the Maine Climate Council webpage, and they do have links to things like the sea level rise maps and those sorts of things. They're not, obviously they're at the state level and they're not specific to each municipality, but some of the questions that are being asked and some of the goals that you may be referring to about the number of heat pumps to be installed and the number of EVs on the road are certainly part of the way that the Maine Climate Council is recommending that Maine as a state achieve this reduction in carbon emissions. So anyways, there's more information there that may be helpful for the questions that you're asking.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah, Ken Olson, I'm a Wells resident. I'm wondering whether the town has, has a clear strategy for addressing sea level rise. Putting the kind of global warming question on the shelf, but acknowledging that we all seem to know that sea level is rising. And does the town have a strategy that basically sets out priorities for how the town intends to address that problem here?
Yeah, please.
I think one of the factors is that we are part of a 6-town consortium because it's not a town issue. It is a regional, it's greater than that, but we're looking at it from a regional standpoint because what may be effective to our neighbors to the south and to the north will help us as well. So that effort is underway and has been for over a year now. I don't have the details for Wells, but those are things that we'll continue to look at, and we'll do that probably on a broader base.
Yeah, I guess part of my question then would be, as part of that plan, I would imagine that we would have to sort of set certain priorities about what strategically we think we can do as a town, as opposed to like a regional.
One thing that I was part of, just to the north of us, the seawall during one of the major storms in Kennebunk was knocked out, a large portion of it. FEMA came in and they fortunately funded that. And part of the funding, which was helpful to us, is they also funded mitigation efforts. And so boulders the size of Volkswagens and beyond were placed out to break up future wave action to take the impact off the seawall. So those are the types of things that I think we look for opportunities. Opportunities when somebody mentioned about rivers increasing when sea level rises, and how we can have outflows into areas that are designated for capturing that water so it doesn't impact our residents and all. Those are the types of things that we need to look at, and I believe Wells has been, but I can give you more information after I have time on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, well,
Yes, yes, sir.
You talk about sea level rise and all of that. Right. Does anybody have a projected date? You say, well, these houses are gonna be so high and they're gonna be this. So, what's the date, the time, the goal? Where are we trying to get to? And how much time do we have to get there?
A meter this century.
This century?
It's a good question, because it's sooner than we had thought even a short while ago. The glaciers
Correct.
are melting much more rapidly, and the seas are, particularly like Grady, is that your name?
Yes.
That the Gulf of Maine is melting faster than any other body of water on the planet. So we are seeing all these impacts. So the
But I have
answer
a
is
hard
sooner
time to
than we'd
believe
like.
that when the ice melts, that the water gets, I know you guys, oh, it's science, whatever. But I still have a hard time believing, you take a glass of water and you put ice in it, when the ice melts, if you fill it right to the rim, it drops down.
Linda can talk to you about that.
Chris, I can tell you though that Southern Maine Planning does have those projections. I'm not gonna say they're accurate or
We're
not.
not gonna be able to do anything, but we're gonna need goals, okay, we gotta be here by this.
They'll tell you by 2050, 2070,
Right,
where they
this is
expect.
where
to
we
be.
gotta go, where we
Absolutely.
gotta be at, okay.
Gentlemen, just one second, Chris, does that, one
I'm done.
All right, does this gentleman back?
Yes, I agree.
Just a clarification, I don't know what kind of ice you use, but it doesn't sit on top of the water in the glass, much like the ice shelves do, so as that melts and disperses.
But ice floats, and the ice disperses the same amount, whether it's in above the water or below the water, the ice disperses the same amount.
Yeah, can I just say,
Just hold on, this is a general, yeah, but just, this is a general. I don't wanna get into a debate portion, because again, it's questions that the town's gathering to answer from the perspective of what the town's doing, and we just, so I wanna kinda, I understand, we wanna kinda just keep that in mind, yes, absolutely, but I just wanna
floating
avoid.
ice does not change sea level, whether it gets frozen or it melts. It's isostatically compensated. If you have ice in a glass and it's floating, when it melts, it won't overflow the glass. It's the ice that's on land or landlocked that will change the sea level. But the other thing that's changing sea level is the temperature of the water. Just like when you heat water on your stove and it expands and it turns into vapor, when you heat water, it expands and it gets higher. So there's two things that are raising sea level, not just the ice melting, the land ice melting, but also the temperature of the water.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bateman?
So I'm curious, like, are the records for the town meetings searchable, like going back pretty far?
Yes.
Because I'm
Couldn't
saying,
tell you
like,
how far, but yes.
can we do a search of climate change related topics going back as far as we can? Because we might find some, well, I don't know, they might have said sea level was rising in 1930, right? Oh, it was rising back then. Then it
In
was
74, we were supposed to be in an ice age in
right.
12 years,
Then it was
so I'm
a
just
concern of cooling in the 1970s, and then we might see in the 1980s it was something else. Whatever the TV says, right? So I would like to see if you guys can look up any records.
As far as the agenda, you could go on the website and stuff is archived on the website. You could do a general search and it will pull up specific keywords. Website's kind of archaic, again, very clunky, so good luck, but.
Go see Michelle.
Questions?
Back here, Jim. It's not really a question, it's just a response, you're responding to you, Chris, about the sea level rising. It's not only the sea level rising, it's the catastrophic weather events that go along with that make the beach area and wells very susceptible to high wind,
Mike Kaplan doing, New Jersey.
So we have two questions that I've seen. We have Mr. Stone, this gentleman back here. I believe you had a question as well? Was it you? No, okay, all right.
I'd just like to comment, if you're interested in sea level changes and what's happened in the past, if you read what Judge Vaughan wrote about in 1871, it's very detailed on how it changed from the 1600s to then, and that shows the progression of what's happened. And I think that'd be very interesting to people to understand that.
Mr. Stone.
Looks like we're.
Any other questions?
One more?
Yes, sir. We'll go with this gentleman first, and we'll have Tim. Yeah, go ahead.
Just as a question for the select board, because I don't know how kind of town policies actually work. What gets the select board to act? What actually would it take for the select board? Is it a people's referendum? Is it a ballot measure? Is it a bond? If enough people are concerned about something, what's the kind of the best way to get things done?
Well, I mean, just from my perspective, again, I can't speak for the other two members here, but I feel that we've tried to be relatively fluid and listen to people and bring issues and also be proactive. We've done a lot of resiliency planning, as we have records to back that up. But also, I mean, this meeting, case in point, granted, it was a petition that was put together that spurred it, but it wasn't legally binding, but it's very important for the representatives that you have. I've had the pleasure of working with them, town staff, that the people are hurt. I believe in that. So we're taking notes, questions. I mean, it's a never-ending topic. And again, there's a lot of different viewpoints on every subject, but I think that we make a concerted effort to try to hear every one of them.
The Energy Committee, as we said, has made lots of proposals, and because those proposals saved the town money, climate change wasn't a factor necessarily, but the town saved money and acted on them.
Well, but even still though, Joe, I can tell you from my perspective, again, it's not necessarily just about money, and you and I spoke about this briefly, okay. So regardless of whether it's climate, let's talk about carbon emissions for a minute. Whether it's climate change or it's the fact that oil's only gonna become more expensive to extract from the earth, fracking and all these policies. We have to, part of the thing that we've tried, locally we've been trying to do, and it would be sure nice if the federal government, the state government would get a little more into it, to be proactive. And in our own lives, we should seek to be proactive. So why would we see that this finite resource, even if it's 100 or 200 years from now, it's going to run out? Why would we wait until that point where it's at a crisis and then wait to act at that point? Now I understand that's also an argument for the climate change, but in this case, again, so when you talk about batteries, when you talk about alternative energies, I don't think there's a single side of it that can argue the fact that we shouldn't be investing these things. And that's the perspective that I adopt from it when I go into it. So there's certainly more than financial motivation when I vote on these things. I like the fact that we're getting involved in these. Some of them I agree with, some of them I'm not. I haven't been crazy. Again, my opinion, I'm not happy with the solar farms that went in town. I could detail those reasons for anybody that's interested. I'm not gonna go into it here. But again, it's not just, I don't feel it to be detracting from what we do to say it's strictly financially motivated. Of course, that is we have a fiduciary obligation to the taxpayers, and that is a big driving force, but again, it's not the only one.
Thanks, good to clarify that, John, thank you.
Absolutely, yes, sir. And does that kind of answer your question, or would you like to follow up? I understand it's kind of ambiguous, but it depends on the topic and the specificness of it. This is obviously a broad topic, so it's hard to answer exactly. I can tell you that the assessor's office, there's electric vehicles. The school department got the grant for the buses. We can't take credit for that, but it's still something that the community did. We signed on to the sanitary district, Nick called it a consortium, but basically a power agreement funded a project, I can't remember somewhere, purchase power agreement. So we've taken various steps.
Yeah, so I guess maybe just the follow-up question is, I think there are a lot of plans out there. I mean, I've been working in Wells for 10 years, I know a lot of you. And I think, the plans are there, the recommendations are there, the models are there, the projections are there. It's more of like, okay, now how do you get to that next, either shovels in the ground or moving parts of the community or applying for grants? Like, whose pen moves? Who pushes buttons on that?
Well, just like this government, just a lot of different departments. I mean, so For example, the Drake's Island Bridge project that's going on right now, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to meet our Public Works Director, Carol Murray, but that was part of the discussion that came up with the engineers in the meeting that we had with the residents of Drake's Island and stakeholders in the community was, what height do you want to build this bridge? Based on the sea level rise in 100 years and sort of how long do you want this to last? So those conversations do take place. Good.
I think in this town, you gotta come to select meetings. You know, we listen every time at those select meetings. I mean, this is not anything to do with climate change, but they came to us about a dog park, right? We found them land, they were in the process of getting a dog park. We listened to them, the people, that they wanted this. I think if people come to select meetings, there's usually 5 of us there, and most of them employees, you know, show up to those things. So we need to hear from you, and that's a great place too. I check my email almost on a daily basis, and the town email, so you can do it there. But I think when you come to meetings and bring forth plans, I mean, some of the stuff in this letter that Joe, or statement that Joe wrote, the street lights, all that stuff was brought to us by the Energy Committee, and we reacted to it in a positive way. Same with the Conservation Committee. They come to purchase land, we react in a positive way. It's at the selectmen meetings. I mean, that's really the place where I believe you can get things done.
Sounds like a lot's going on.
We try.
We had a question from this gentleman in the back. Now, Mr. Ratliff?
So with any of these policies going forward, is there any sort of, I guess, list of kind of baseline protections for residents, businesses who, you know, for anything that, I don't know, maybe like a line in the sand where the select board is not willing to go with some of these recommendations as far as what they expect residents and business owners to do going forward with any of this?
So when those recommendations, are you referring to the document in which Mr. Wheeler alluded to?
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah, so that was, Joe, how would you want to describe that? I know that you wrote it. That was just a suggestion from.
Well, those are recommendations to be considered by the committee.
Right, yeah. So that was not a town-sponsored document.
Okay. Excellent. So, but with any policy that you do or do not decide to enact, is there going to be some sort of baseline of things we're not going to do to residents or business owners in, as far as what they're going to be expected to do with any policies that might affect them with climate change?
You're not gonna tell us to drive on the left side of the road, are you?
Well, I mean, it's a perfect example.
I know. I'm not for mandates. I'm for working together, like I said, and when things are practical, to go through and do those, again, I think it's just common ground, my view. And I'm not speaking to the board, I'll try to give you an answer. I don't wanna go through and unnecessarily burden someone. Somebody needs to make the decision on their own, what's right for them. That's my position.
And I'm not even sure some of those things that are written, I would think we legally have the right to.
That's what, some of them seemed
to me,
very.
when I read through it, I was like, oh,
There's a bit of toe stepping, I felt.
So, that's why I feel about it. I don't,
Okay.
But the
I mean, I'll take
selectmen-
anyone's suggestion, but it doesn't, you know.
The selectmen don't have the authority to make a mandate like that for the whole town of Wells. It would have to go to a town meeting, and the whole town would have to vote on it.
Right.
So that's where it would go. I mean, you guys wouldn't, you said everybody's gonna drive an electric car? Yeah, goodbye to all of you being sitting up there, because there'll be another group
Well,
up
but
there.
even with that, is it within the municipal, and this is something you have to have a legal review on, I mean, it's more convoluted, that does the municipality even have the authority to do some of these things? It rises to a state and federal level at that point. Some of the stuff that these boards, which I draw a serious issue with, some of the stuff I see going on, some of it's just activism. I don't think that's healthy on either side of it for a town board that has no business doing something to get into it. There are questions that we can answer about resiliency planning and our infrastructure and things like that, but some of the stuff, no, we should not be wading into it. It just doesn't make sense. We can't do anything about it.
Perfect answer, thank you.
There was another hand over here, Beth?
Yeah, I think this gentleman over here brought a good question, and that was, who's in charge of looking at the whole picture when it comes to sustainability, resilience, energy conservation? And it occurs to me that there's a role for our own sustainability coordinator in town. And I know right away that sounds like an expensive proposal, because it would be another salaried employee of the town. But it also occurs to me there is a lot of federal and state grant money available, and it will not come our way unless grants, and I don't know if we have anyone in town that is able to do that. I know everyone's pretty maxed out time-wise. So I see possibly looking at the opportunity to get our own sustainability coordinator and a committee to support that coordinator, so that that person could help us to access some of the funds available to the town for resilience and for renewable energy projects. I think that it's going to go by without us being able to get it unless we go after it. So, as on the energy committee, we don't have the manpower for that, but I see that there's a need for it, and I think as a town we should consider it.
Michelle, so you had your hand up back there.
The best part of this committee, thank you, Joe, for all your hard work to make sure this happens, is the fact that people are here to hear and listen, no matter what your opinion is, okay? We all have an opportunity to educate ourselves. I've been on the Conservation Commission committee for a number of years now, and I've had the opportunity to go to all kinds of workshops that have been going on all around this region, all about water flow and water levels rising, everything you want to know. Lawn Home has great resources for everyone. Use it, learn, understand what your community is, and want to help you keep it this way, then act into it. Because a lot of people do a lot of talking and they don't act. And I know that because I've been on a lot of committees. The same people are on those committees. So act and not just talk. Do something about it. I'd love to see you all at some of these things that I've been watching.
Well, that's a good point too, and that's just in general. I appreciate you bringing that point up. As sort of a political newcomer in town, it's been somewhat discouraging at points to get in. Just the low involvement is discouraging at points. So it's certainly good to see some new faces out here tonight that I haven't seen before, and I am encouraged by that. So I hope that that's a trend that we can keep up. Thank you for that.
So I have to follow up with Nick's question, and then the discussion after that, in putting it as a question is, would the town consider hiring an energy sustainability person, position, whatever we want to call it? And maybe that's just a question for you to write down in your notes.
Already did.
Yeah, good. And then be going and thinking about it. Because I too agree, and I was going to jump in and say, John McLeod does not like mandates, which is a good thing. And I too am, again, really thrilled to see so many people out tonight with such a variety of expression and willingness to take a look at how we see things, and are we willing to see it in a different way.
Thank you, Lynn. Mrs. Mills, Ms. Mills.
While there is a diverse opinion in this room about the causes and pros and cons of the topic of climate change, I think most people would agree that we want to live in a healthy community. And so I have a very specific question in regards to healthy communities. And that has to do with, has the town considered exploring and possibly enacting an ordinance such as the town of Kennebunk has, that is for no idling in the community? The majority of scientists, I won't say all, the majority of scientists agree that the burning of gasoline in cars contributes to air pollution. And they also agree that increased levels of air pollution contribute to increases in respiratory illnesses. Not to mention that it makes for a pretty ugly community when you have a lot of smog. I've lived in Los Angeles. I've taught in the country of China, where everybody has to wear these all the time when you go outside because of the level of air pollution. So, is that something the town has considered or would consider? Or would say you'd look into it?
We'll write that one down.
John, you could just mandate electric vehicles and there'd be no issue. Just mandate them.
Well,
Mandate
it's just
them.
it's a broader conversation again. With any piece of policy, I think that is a basic discussion wouldn't do it any issue. I think that again, you have to look at all things considered, even things outside of what you're trying to accomplish. From, for example, an enforcement standpoint, are our police already overtaxed with what they currently have to handle? So I'm not trying to avoid it to be funny. It's just something I wouldn't be comfortable answering it in the venue without further thought. So just to clarify why I had that.
And I can clarify that Kennebunk has a policy, not an ordinance, so therefore it's a recommendation but not enforceable.
So it's not
And so therefore the onus is not placed on law enforcement or others. It's just highly encouraged through signage and education.
You would not be opposed to doing that, I would hope, putting the same signs up and putting the same kind of policy together.
They
You know,
don't
if it's a
read the
policy,
signs
not a
now.
mandate.
What's that?
It's a policy, not a mandate.
Well, again, it's, but,
A lot of new cars turn off when you stop at a stoplight now anyway.
yeah.
In like 2007, I stopped at a stop sign the first time, it turned off, freaking out.
I almost didn't
Oh,
buy
my
a
car
car
died.
because I thought it was broken.
Is there a question up back?
Yeah, we had one right here.
Yes, I'm Steve Shepherd, I've lived in Wells all my life. And to your question, they have vehicles that already shut down
Some, yep.
when you stop and restart and take off. And they also have clean diesels too that also shut off if they idle for more than 5 minutes. So a lot of that's already taken place in the auto industry. But I'm not here for the auto stuff, I'm here for the electric stuff. The solar panels, and everybody thinks it's a great idea.
Not everybody.
But everybody tells me that they're environmentally friendly. Well, I still can't wrap my head around going out into the woods that's natural and stripping it to the bedrock and putting solar panels up. Tell me where this environmental friendly comes in, because I'm lost. When the diesels go out there and start chugging up loom, cutting trees, the same trees, if I was taught in school in science, that scrub our air to keep us going.
Would you like a scientific response to the question, or do you not?
So if I hear say that, oh, we just need more solar panels, we need more, it's not gonna work. It just ain't gonna cut it.
Do you want a response to that or not? I don't know if you.
You go ahead and respond, because I don't see any environmental stuff.
Respond, or do you think that's too late?
Is it a lengthy one?
No,
Let's make sure it's just
Yeah.
factual.
You can cut down 100 acres of trees, and you can calculate that you will save far more carbon dioxide going into the air by cutting down those trees than if you were generating that energy from a fossil fuel. Far more. I don't like to see solar panels cut out of forests. They should go on landfills, gravel pits, and rooftops, and so on. But even if when you do cut down forests, it is still a tremendous saving on what goes into the atmosphere as greenhouse gases. Simple calculation.
Right, yeah, I totally agree with you. Sure, saves a lot of carbon dioxide. What about all them animals that are out there? Huh? What about all them spotted lizards that we've been trying to save? The hooded owl or the hawk up in the sky. They all have homes out there. Deer. They're all out there living. Their lives, not ours,
The
theirs.
deers are moved because of the houses, not because.
Because that's the only place they got left is the woods. You put a house up and just,
We've destroyed plenty of the ecosystems looking for oil.
there you go.
So,
I'm not against all this solar panel stuff, I'm just saying the way they're going about it is completely wrong. That's all I can say. It's crazy that.
We should have a debate someplace
I
else.
have seen the destruction of hundreds of acres of land and seeing what it does to the
We're going to
environment.
statements now, we should be in questions, but I think we're.
I just wanted to get that out, so you guys think about that one.
Thank you. Which, yes, please.
It's more of a statement, but I'll say it as a question. Have you had a chance to look at the Bar Harbor climate change plan? Because it's a good model. I don't agree with everything in it, but it's a good model for a small town that's near the seaside. So I just wanted to suggest that. But it wasn't a statement, I made it as a question.
I think it's probably done. Thank you for that. Yes, sir.
I would support the hiring a sustainable director and so forth, partly because we have heard so many different places trying to keep clear what's going on at the state level, what's going on at the regional level, what's going on at Loud Home, what's going on in the town, what's going on all over the place. But I'll put it as a question, what are you going to do to try to pull together all these different resources and information so that it's understandable for each individual resident? And that'd be one way of doing it, but there may be other ways as well.
That is a pretty big case.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'll let-
And then we'll go to this gentleman right here.
So I have a question, it's a serious question, because I own on the beach, not personally, but family-wise, I've owned on the beach since 1970-something. And I've heard a lot about, the ocean rising and stuff, and I've seen my worst storm I ever saw was in '78, by far. But the answer is always, when I too studied Sandy in New Jersey, because I'm a weather nut, so I started that way. But the answer to a lot of the problems in those areas was to bring more sand in, bring those sand dunes, bring the rocks in, which you cannot do on Wells Beach. You can build the rocks in the public, those two public areas by, I think where you live down by Fisherman's Cove, if I'm not mistaken, and by Forbes. In those areas, you can bring the rocks in. You can't bring the rocks in down by the jetties and all the way up from the jetties up. You can't build, we try to replace the sand with dredging every year. The permits to get that is unreal every time we try to dredge every 5 years. So I'd love to hear from people in an email, not type, because it's probably much too long an answer for the next 5 minutes, how we can protect our beaches in any other way, because every time we try to do something, we're met with, that's environmentally unsafe. Or you're killing a flounder, or you're killing the piping plovers, whatever it is. And I'm not against protecting them, don't take that as sarcastic. What it is saying, we don't have really good suggestions on how to save. If we're trying to save that real estate, Vander Forbes told me when we bought the house, and I was only 12 when he told me this, and he's a long time resident, a lot of you know. 1978, he said, smartest purchase your father ever made, because that's oceanfront in 10 years. Well, we're still not oceanfront, nowhere near. But that's what he said, and because he saw that, he lived on the beach most of his life, but I don't know the answer. And when we have to have these answers, what we learned in New Jersey, we can't do here. And that sand will wash to the jetty anyway, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to bring more sand in. Because remember now, every time we dredge the harbor, we put it onto the beach, and sometimes within months, it's right back where it was before. So I think I would love to hear, if it's some of the people that work at these places, I would love to hear some of your answers to do it, ways we can do it.
There's really no silver bullet solution, so
No,
I'm
right.
trying to strike that balance.
Right.
That's a hard balance.
I feel like it's a perfect example of us trying to tame nature, and it will not be tamed. I mean, we're visitors here. This place has been here forever. It's gonna do what it's gonna do over a course of time. It just is what it is. Sorry.
This gentleman right here had a question.
You mentioned the six-town partnership consortium, whatever it is. Is it possible to use what some of those towns have already done in terms of their plans and reports? Just like someone said earlier, we have a research center here at Wells Reserve. In order to save money, which many people are talking about and considering, and in order to address all of these different points of view and alternative ways of doing things to be practical, is the town of Wells working with towns that have already started the process. So for example, I know in one town, the emphasis is not so much on the sustainability person, but the grant writer, at least to start with, because it's a lot cheaper to get a grant writer. Where is Wells in terms of working with all of these nearby resources that would help address the problems and save money for a town that depends on tourism and cannot mess around taking chances on what could happen with the effects of climate change.
Great, thank you. Any other
Are you
questions?
writing that down?
I'll look over the check.
I already have an idea on that, and that is that the central repository that's really been able to help us is Southern Maine Planning. And so they have a consultant that has been recently hired on sustainability that is a resource for us in Wells. The resiliency partnership I just mentioned, that we have $10,000 allocated to be able to participate in that, will open avenues for us to have grant writing assistance. We're also a partner with Ogunquit, who got $12,500 in the initiative. The reason they received more is because they're deemed to have less resources than the town of Wells to pursue this opportunity. But SMPDC is a repository that has done a lot of work, and I think that we can draw from, which in turn are the other communities that have maybe a little bit ahead of us, not significantly, that we can draw from.
Okay.
You know, I will say that it is an interesting, like I said, I don't think that we can delve into it too much tonight. It need to be considered, but from my perspective, it is an interesting idea of how are we writing these grants, who's keeping track of this. The answer, I think, right now is there's a few different people that are doing that, depending on the department and what it pertains to. But that is an interesting question to pose, so I think that would be an interesting thing to look at. Thank you for your contribution. Yes, sir.
It occurs to me that part of the role of that resilient person would be the education, which I think we all know that this is what's needed on all these issues in order for us to make the correct decisions on what should be done. But I think it's kind of obvious from all the different questions we had about where do I find this information. I mean, it's easy to tell them use Google, but that's not that doesn't always work out. I know I ran into, for example, the water level, the water level maps that FEMA puts out, showing wells, but I couldn't tell you how I found them. But I think it was from some study that was published. It was on the well site, and I ran into these maps. It was incredible. But so I think that a lot of the issues seem to be based on knowledge and disagreements on what the facts are, and some of them are probably there aren't hard facts. It's a lot of it's a little bit of opinion in there. But I think we need to everybody needs to be able to look at the same set of information, have access to it. I think that would be another role for that coordinator.
I think that way, very quickly.
Yes, we'll have to wait, and then we gotta be mindful of time. I believe Cindy has a question.
Oh, it's not a question, I just a statement, because the library's now closed, so as people I see starting to, you're gonna wanna go out this door over here. To get out
If
of
I
the
could
library.
respond very quickly, sir, to your statement, or question. In my conversation with Southern Maine Planning, there are going to be 3 steps that the town must complete. One of those will be an educational seminar and a community meeting. I hope to use some of what we did tonight in that effort. But they will distribute educational materials, so I think that's a level playing field for information that they deem to be correct. I think they've researched quite a bit. So I think those are steps that are underway and will be forthcoming.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, folks, that's going to go ahead and conclude our meeting for this evening. I want to thank everybody for coming out. We've covered a lot of ground, and thanks again.